All right, here's another type of question that you're going to be presented with that you can solve using the midpoint formula. This one is telling us that point M is the midpoint, is the middle of point A and B. It's showing us where point A is, it's right here, but it's not showing us where point B is. It's asking, where is point B? We know that this is the middle, so point B is probably somewhere around here. You look at this, M is about the middle. So to find exactly the coordinates of point B, we can use the midpoint formula. I have a template where I've outlined the different steps you can go through to figure this out, and that's what I'm using for this example. The first step is to label the points that you do know. So we know one of the endpoints is -7, 7. So I've labeled that x1, y1. And I know my midpoint is -6, -1. So I labeled that x MP for midpoint and y MP for midpoint. So what I'm going to attempt to do here is to figure out first, what is the x coordinate of our other endpoint? So I'm going to just really focus in on the x coordinates of the endpoint I do know and the midpoint that I do know and substitute them in. Remember, to find the midpoint between 2 points, all you're doing is averaging the x coordinates and the y coordinates. So if I know that x1 is -7 and I don't know what x2 is, then I can just put in my -7. I don't know what x2 is, but I know if I add those two together and divide by 2, it's going to give me the x coordinate of my midpoint. So this is the equation that I'm going to solve and try to figure out what is that x2. So to solve this, the very first step is to try to make it so it's not a fraction. Let's undo that dividing by 2 by multiplying by 2. Because 2 divided by 2 cancels out. So you're just left with -7 plus this x2. And that equals -12. Now I can solve and figure out what x2 is by adding 7 to both sides. When I do that, I get -5. So I know now that this endpoint x coordinate is -5. Now I can do the same thing and find out what my y coordinate of this other endpoint is. So let's go to the next slide. So we did find out that the x coordinate is -5. Now I need to find out what is my y coordinate of our other endpoint. So I look at that step 1 where I labeled my endpoint I do know and my midpoint, and now we're really going to focus in on the y's. So remember the y coordinate of the midpoint, you're just averaging the 2 y coordinates. We do know the y coordinate of one of our endpoints is -7, but we don't know the other one, so we just leave that as y2. But we know if we add those together and divide by 2, that's going to be the y coordinate of our midpoint. So this is the equation that I'm going to solve. So just like the last one, the first step I'm going to do is undo that dividing by 2 by multiplying by 2, because that would cancel that out, and I end up with -7 plus y2 equals -2. And now I can move that -7 by adding 7 to both sides. And I end up with y2 equals 5. So that is the y coordinate of this other endpoint. And what I have here in the yellow box would be my answer.